This is Quint Bilo with a continuation discussion of process costing. We want to define what equivalent units are and their calculation, and explain the first two steps of the product cost report, saving its completion until the next talk. So our concern is the first two steps, computing physical units and translating those into equivalent units of production at month end. We noted previously that equivalent unit production is a very critical calculation to the process cost system. This is the amount of work done during a period of time, comprised of both completed units as well as partially completed units during the period. There are four steps in the process costing method. First, we summarize output in physical units. We compute output in equivalent units. We summarize total cost to account for and compute equivalent unit costs, and assign those total costs to units completed and units in ending work in process at month end. We do this on a department production cost report. I want to focus on the first two steps of this process costing, summarizing output in physical units and computing equivalent units of production. The equivalent unit of production is very critical to this process. If this number is calculated incorrectly, all follow-on steps will be incorrect. Let's backtrack, though, at our three cost elements of manufacturing: direct material, direct labor, and overhead. We're going to keep the materials elements separate, but we're going to combine the last two cost elements, that is, direct labor and overhead. The combined costs elements are generically called conversion costs. Again, direct labor and overhead. Why is it called such? The process is taking raw materials and converting it into finished product. Why only two groupings? Well, the costs are incurred differently. We're going to assume that all materials are introduced right away in the production process, but that direct labor and overhead, our conversion costs, are applied gradually throughout the manufacturing process. So, different timing of costs coming in will lead to two separate calculations of work done, two separate calculations of equivalent units of work. So all direct materials will be our first bundle of costs, and all direct labor and overhead will be our second bundle of costs. The materials all added at once, the conversion cost gradually incurred. The following example is a beginning attempt to explain equivalent units. Let's take a student headcount example. If we compared schools on the basis of total students, that would not be totally useful. Why? Because some students are full-time, others only carry a part-time load. So they're not comparable. It's like apples and oranges to add up full-time students and part-time students. We need to convert the part-time students in a calculation that translates them to what looks like a full-time student. For example, if we have one part-time student taking only a 50% credit workload, that's equivalent to a 1/2 full-time student, expressed as 0.5 full-time equivalent students. Have you ever seen the expression FTE? There it is. Let's take an illustration. We have a work-study job in the office of the college president, and we're asked to compute the cost of instruction per full-time equivalent student at the school. The following information is provided. Total cost of instruction, $9 million. Student population, full-time students, 900. Part-time students, 1,000. Now we simply can't add those student populations together. They're apples and oranges. We need more information about these part-time students. We'll assume that our part-time students take 60% of the classes of a full-time student during the year. So let's compute our full-time equivalent students for the year. First, full-time students, 900. Part-time students, 1,000 times 60%. That's their class load. So 900 plus 600, total of 1,500 full-time equivalent students during the year. Let's make our calculation now of cost of instruction per full-time equivalent student. Our total cost, $9 million, divided by our calculation above, 1,500 full-time equivalent students for an average cost of $6,000 per full-time equivalent student. We will see in our production cost report that we're always starting with physical units, that which is fully observable, that which is incomplete from the previous month, and newly introduced units during the month. So the report begins with beginning work in process and adds newly introduced product. Why? So we know what we have to work with. Total B plus A, beginning plus additions during the month. But importantly, we need to know its status at month end, that which is still on hand, not yet complete, the E's, and that which is subtracted out, fully completed. It's the fully transferred out items, the S, and the ending inventory E that we assign our costs to at month end. So our production cost reports are concerned with assigning our manufacturing costs to this ending products at month end, that which is fully complete, and that which production was started but not complete, still in work in process at that month end. Now the first step of the production cost report will be to reconcile our physical units, that which is totally available, to their status at month end. But our focus will be the month end status. In this example, we have 100,000 units beginning work in process June 1 that were incomplete from the previous month, carried over. We started 800,000 new units in production, total of 900,000 units available during the month. The key month end status, 700,000 were complete and transferred out. 200,000 still remain because they were incomplete as of June 30th. We need to express this ending status into equivalent units worked on for our costing purposes, both fully transferred out and still left behind in ending work in process, the S and the E. Let's take a simplified example. Let's say a company produces 1,000 gallons of paint during the month, fully complete during a period of time. They also worked on making another 200 gallons, but they're still on the floor because they didn't complete those 200 gallons. Let's assume those 200 uncompleted gallons are only 50% full of usable paint. That's the equivalent of 100 full gallons of paint. So our combined work performed during the month, those fully completed units transferred out and work not completed is as follows: 1,000 fully completed plus 100 equivalent units still in work in process inventory at month end for a total of 1,100 total EUs worked upon during the period. Take a picture of that. 1,000 fully completed gallons of paint times 100%, 1,000 EU transferred out. Ending work in process, 200 units observable, but only half full. Multiply those 200 times 50% to get 100 units of EUs worked on, total of 1,100 units during the period of time. So we can observe that which is transferred out. We can observe the partially completed units at month end, but we have to express those in terms of the same work units. So it's an apples and apples comparison. EUs does that for us. Again, our focus is on the ending status, the ending work in process inventory, and at month end, how much we subtracted out that was fully completed. That's our costing focus. Fully completed units transferred out, subtract out a work in process, and the ending work in process. In this case, 200 units, but only 50% completed as of month end. We'll calculate an average cost, and it'll be applied to both our completed items transferred out and the ending work in process. That's why we need to calculate our total EUs of work performed, fully completed S and ending work in process E on the same basis. And that is equivalent units. In this case, 1,100 equivalent units during the period of time. Apples and apples. Now this chapter uses what's called the weighted average method to complete our production cost report. The weighted average considers the degree of completion, the weighting of units both completed and transferred out, and also units in ending work in process. The beginning work in process is not part of our computation of equivalent units. Why? Because at month end we're concerned about costing out our ending units, everything done and transferred out, and that which is still left behind in ending work in process. Even though we use beginning work in process and newly introduced items To reconcile our physical units, we do not use that beginning work in process to calculate our equivalent units during the month. Our formula is as below. Total units completed and transferred out, added to ending work in process equivalent units, is our total EUs of production for the month. So the fully transferred units out are multiplied times 100%. The ending work in process, the unfinished partial units times the percent complete, gives us an EU calculation in ending work in process units. Those two are added together to give us our total EUs of production for the period of time under consideration. Now the focus of the weighted average method is on what moves on to the next department, irrespective of when it was started, plus the amount of work that was put into the ending work in process, items not ready for prime time, but work was performed on them. Why? Because the weighted average method does not care when the units were started. Because of that, we will merge the dollars of the prior period assigned to the prior period ending work in process, beginning of the current month, plus the current month TMC, total manufacturing costs. That will form a total pool of dollars that will compute average unit costs. The merger of these dollars is then assigned on a uniform average basis to units fully transferred out and done, and to the partial units in ending work in process at month end. This is the process costing that's going on. Let's calculate the equivalent units of production for the Corey Company packaging department during a period of time. During the month, they completed 10,000 units, fully completed and transferred out, and they also worked on 5,000 more units that were still in ending work in process. They're not complete, they're only 70% complete, and therefore not done. What's the EUs for this period of time? First, fully completed units, 10,000. Ending work in process, we can observe 5,000 units, only 70% complete, yields 3,500 equivalent unit calculation. The total equivalent units of production for the period of time, 13,500. These total EUs of production can only be calculated. They're not totally observable. They consist of the physical units we can observe, fully complete, but we have to calculate the amount of work done in the ending work in process units, 3,500. Let's now talk about the refinements on the weighted average method. This is due to the fact that costs are introduced at different times. Materials first, conversion costs coming gradually. In this example here, Kellogg has produced Eggo waffles. They have 3 departments that they produce these in: a mixing department, a baking department, and a freezing packaging department. We'll focus on the mixing department here for purposes of our production costing. So the first step in doing a production cost report for the month of June is to reconcile our physical units. We have a total of 100,000 work in process beginning, 800,000 introduced, total of 900,000. But the key is we're concerned with the ending status of those 900,000 units, 700,000 transferred out at month end, and 200,000 at June 30th still in work in process. We have 2 separate columns here, materials and conversion, our 2 bundle of costs because they're introduced at different time periods. The materials are 100% present when we begin the process, but the conversion cost, direct labor and overhead, are added gradually throughout the period as goods are converted into finished goods. Now, as stated, our concern about equivalent units is based on the ending status. Status transferred out at month end and still in work in process. These are the units we want to calculate to equivalent units of production for the month for costing purposes. We are not concerned with the percent complete of the beginning work in process. That 70% is we are not concerned with in the weighted average method. We're concerned about all the materials being there, 100% for the ending units that are transferred out, and the fact that the ending work in process is only 60% complete with respect to conversion costs. A reminder that conversion costs are labor costs plus overhead, and that the beginning work in process is not part of the equivalent units of production calculation during the current month. We're concerned with the month-end status, June 30th. Let's deal with the materials cost element first. We transferred out 700,000 units. They're fully complete with respect to materials. They're fully complete with respect to conversion costs. Hence, as we divide our costs between materials and conversion costs, the units applicable to each of those fully transferred out are 700,000 and 700,000. We're not double counting this because we're splitting the costs. The ending work in process, the incomplete units as of June 30th, 200,000 units that we observe, all the materials are assumed to be there. So we'll multiply that times 100% and put that in the materials column. 200,000 equivalent units with respect to materials as concerns that ending work in process. The conversion of those ending units, though, is only 60% complete. And so we'll multiply those same 200,000 observable ending work in process times 60% to arrive at 120,000 equivalent units as concerns conversion cost element. And we'll add up our total equivalent units for materials, 700,000 plus 200,000, 900,000, and the total equivalent units for conversion costs are 820,000 units. This is the measure of work done during the month as concerns materials and as concerns conversion costs. These two bundles of costs are introduced separately, and therefore we have two separate EU calculations. Our objective is to end up with total equivalent units for materials, consisting of those transferred out, plus materials that are in ending work in process, and also total equivalent units for conversion costs, again, those totally transferred out, plus those in ending work in process. Let's do another calculation of equivalent units. Let's say the mixing department's output during the period consisted of 20,000 units completed and transferred out, and 5,000 units in ending work in process. And let's assume that those ending work in process are 60% complete with respect to both materials and conversion costs. This is a slight twist here. We're assuming that all the materials were not introduced when it was started. We're given that the beginning inventory is 1,000 units, 40% complete with respect to materials and conversion costs. What are the equivalent units of production during the current month? First hint, ignore the beginning inventory. Just deal with the ending transferred out units and the ending work in process. The answer is 23,000 equivalent units during the current month. Let's review that calculation. The most straightforward calculation is that which is transferred out, 20,000 units complete. They're fully complete with respect to materials, fully complete with respect to conversion. That's what's make them complete and able to be transferred out to the next department. The ending work in process is incomplete. We have 5,000 observable units, of which 60% of the materials are there, or 3,000 in the material column. And as concerns conversion, they're also 60% complete, so 3,000 equivalent units in the conversion column. We want to add those two up. Our total EUs of production at month end for materials, 23,000 units, conversion, 23,000 units. Again, this is a slight departure from the problems that will be presented in this chapter, in that not all materials were present when production was started, but only 60%. Again, this is an exception for this illustration. The chapter's problems will always consider that 100% of the materials are introduced at the beginning of production. The chapter's problems will keep it simple. And therefore, we'd expect to see that the total EUs for materials will be different than the total EUs for conversion. That is, we'll expect that the total EUs for materials will be higher than the total EUs for conversion because of the fact that we're assuming that all materials are introduced when we do start the process. For other homework problems, not this illustration. Let's do another example on calculation of equivalent units. Here it's assumed a fabricating department has the following production and cost data for the current month. Beginning work in process, nothing. Units transferred out during the current month, 15,000 completed. At month end, we have 10,000 units observed in ending work in process. Here we're assuming that the materials are fully entered at the beginning of the process, 100%. And the ending work in process units are assumed to be 30% complete with respect to conversion cost. Let's calculate the equivalent units of production for the materials and conversion costs separately. So first, for materials, we have units transferred out, 15,000 units. They are fully completed with respect to materials and all costs, but for materials, 15,000 units. For any work in process, we have 10,000 units we observe, and all the materials have been introduced. So as concerns materials, it's 10,000 units observed, any work in process times 100% of material presence, 10,000 units, add them up, and our total equivalent units of production as concerns the material cost element is 25,000 units. Let's now switch to a calculation of equivalent units for conversion costs, same example. Units transferred out, 15,000 units. Again, they're only transferred out because they're fully complete with respect to conversion. First calculation, 15,000 units. Any work in process, the 10,000 units observed times 30% of their complete as concerns processing. That's why they're in any work in process. They're not fully converted. 3,000 units added 15,000 units, total calculation of 18,000 units of equivalent units of production as concerns the conversion cost element. These are calculations you need to learn in this chapter. Let's do a variation of this last example. What if we have a beginning work in process inventory units not complete from the prior period? But let's assume that the total units transferred out during the month completed are the same amount, 15,000. Just some come from the beginning that we started last month and completed this month. And in the current month, we only started 12,000 new. Let's compute the equivalent units of production for conversion costs only under this example. So, total units transferred out, 15,000. It does not matter when production began for the weighted average method. So 3,000 from the beginning work in process, even though that was 10% complete at the beginning of the period, we ignore that percentage of completion, and we know that 3,000 were completed. We know that we completed the full amount that had been started last month in the current month, plus we completed the full 12,000 units that were started new in the current month, total 15,000. Any work in process, the same 10,000 that we observe, but only 30% complete at month end, gives us the 3,000 equivalent unit calculation. That adds up to 18,000 equivalent units of production for conversion. Please note that the EUs for conversion are the same calculation under the weighted average method. It does not matter when production started. The ending status is king. So during this discussion, we just concern ourselves with the first two steps of completing a production cost report, summarizing output in physical units, and then computing that output in equivalent units. We'll bring in the dollars in the last two steps in our next discussion to complete our production cost report.